Hi there, I'm Claudia Hammond. Thanks for downloading Health Check. Today I am in Hong Kong. As a port, it has a long history of trade and exchanges of ideas with other countries. But with that brings an exchange of germs too. And Hong Kong has found itself at the centre of several disease outbreaks over the decades and even the centuries. From the plague in 1894, in just 1 year, 77,000 rats were caught and killed, to bird flu, swine flu and the shock of SARS in 2003. With crowded living conditions, diseases have spread fast. Now, all this has been a huge challenge for Hong Kong's people, but it's a place that survived and learned lessons other parts of the world have taken on board to make themselves safer. So in today's show, I'm finding out how the fabric of Hong Kong itself has been shaped by its history of epidemics. Later on, I'll be visiting a herb garden and the museum which now sits in Hong Kong's first purpose-built medical laboratory. But we're starting here in a square, just off a street in one of the earliest Chinese residential districts. There will soon be a new app, actually, that people can use to navigate their way around this specially designed medical heritage trail. But I'm lucky enough to have my own live guide, Faith Ho, who is a professor of pathology at the University of Hong Kong, and I couldn't ask for a better expert on the medical history of this region.
We are actually here at Blake Garden, which is the heart of this district called Tai Ping Shan. The name Tai Ping Shan comes from the mountain that you can see at the back of you, going all the way up to the peak. And it was on the slope of this mountain, near the lower end of it, that the first settlement for the Chinese people of Hong Kong was built. It was right in front of us near the harbour, would be where all the barges and all the ships came and unloaded all the goods as part of the trade that was really being well developed in Hong Kong.
And it's hard to imagine now because it's a lovely garden square and there's the birds around us and there's a great big banyan tree and there's lots of beds and raised pathways and it's so sort of manicured and beautiful. But what would the buildings have been like here?
Yes, you have to imagine how it was at the end of the 19th century. Within this confined space, all the houses were tenement houses, no windows, and sometimes they were built back to back. So you may have something like 30, 40 people living within one of these houses. At the height of Tai Ping Shan, you may have more than 1,000 people living within an acre. And for the same period in London, it would be average of 60 per acre.
Wow,
so
that's a huge number.
So it was extremely crowded. There was no proper sanitation. There was no water, no toilets. So rats were everywhere. And it had been warned many times that this type of living environment was ripe for an outbreak, and it happened.
And that was in 1894?
Yes, when the bubonic plague first broke out. The first case was detected at the government civil hospital not too far away, and that person actually lived on Tai Ping Shan Street. The next day they found another 20 cases at the Tung Hua.
And how much was known at the time about what was causing the plague?
Nobody knew the cause, and it was thought that probably it was the Black Death. So quickly the government got into action, but I think Hong Kong at that time had two peoples living side by side with a very different cultural background, people with a long civilization that had their own medical systems, Chinese medicine, and then Western medicine had just begun with the germ theory and everything to have their own ideas of public health as well. And up till then, there was not much effort made to try to cross the boundaries between the two peoples. So when the plague came, these two people were forced to have to work together to try and control this epidemic.
And when did they work out that it was rats that were carrying the plague?
All they knew was that usually you need rats to die first and then the human plague to come out. But the actual cause was not known until the Hong Kong plague broke out. And that was the best opportunity for European science to come and discover the cause of plague. The Pasteur Institute in Paris and then Robert Koch's Institute in Berlin, each sent their own people here. And both of them were able to isolate the bacteria.
And how did this end up becoming a garden and instead of tenement blocks?
What happened was that Governor Blake, he realized that overcrowding would be one factor contributing to epidemics. It was his idea that we needed a big open space like this so that you can reduce overcrowding.
So it's the fact that the plague was here that means this garden is here now. It is shaping the city that we see today.
Definitely, yeah.
Well, we're going to head now to a place that was very important to the Chinese people, an ancestral hall. Which way do we need to head? Down the street?
And very soon you would see all along here we've got lots of steps. That's the remaining feature of this district of Taipei Sound.
And now it's got shops and cafes, people sitting outside.
They used to have shops also, but there were always also vice dens, gambling, opium.
It's hard to imagine. It must be so different from now.
That's right. So now we've come to see a few of the temples around here. You see the one in front is a bathhouse that was built after the plague, particularly to help improve the sanitation and the hygiene.
Which one's the bathhouse?
The pink building.
The pink one here?
Yeah, in front. Now next to it is that old building. It was the first ancestral hall built in Hong Kong. And the need for it was because most of the people who came to Hong Kong to work from China came on their own. They did not bring their families with them. If they were unfortunate to die here, maybe they had no one to look after the burials and whatever. Now, most Chinese want to go back to their own village if they were to die. So they had the comfort of knowing that even if they died here, they were buried in an unmarked grave. If he could put his tablet with his name on it in that hall, maybe the family one day would come out looking for him. They would then take it back to their home village where they feel is their resting place, as it were.
Oh, it's quite sad, isn't it?
It is very sad. You can hear inside the bells of people worshipping.
So we've come through the temple. There are lots and lots of shelves all around, and each of these are tablets for different people who died.
Different people. So the tablet has the name of the person on it. Some of the newer ones have got a big photograph as well.
And might some of these people have died from plague?
It could have been. At that time, people could have died from many things. Smallpox, malaria. And if they were terminally ill, often they were just turned out of the place where they were, and they were left on the streets. So sometimes people who were kind would bring you to this place here, where at least you found somewhere a place of refuge, but not a place for treatment. There were the dead and the dying next to each other. And then the governor knew that he had to do something quickly. The Chinese leaders wanted a hospital anyway.
And is that a hospital that's still here today?
We can have a look at it.
So is this the hospital?
Yes. This is rebuilt in the 1930s, and then there are further new buildings. That glass one,
Oh yes, I see.
that is the Center for Treatment and Research in Chinese Medicine. During the time of the plague, they were still only offering Chinese medicine. And the day after the first case was discovered, they found 20 undiagnosed cases of plague already.
Already in the hospital?
In the hospital,
Wow.
undiagnosed. In Chinese medicine, they wouldn't have the idea of an infectious disease. Eventually, they allowed one Chinese doctor of Western medicine to be a resident here, and they would look at every patient who comes in to see whether they had infectious disease and need isolation. And then for all the rest, the patient was offered an option of whether they wanted to be treated with Western or Chinese medicine. But again, when SARS came, all this changed again. There was a huge pressure on the hospital authority then that patients with SARS who were not responding to Western medicine should be allowed to have Chinese medicine. And it was a big dilemma. So eventually the hospital authority decided that certain patients are allowed to be treated experimentally.
So where's our next stop on our tour?
So we're going to see a little bit more about what happened after the plague at the disinfecting station.
So there are steps up now and a path, and there are palm trees. It's lovely. But so the disinfecting station would have been here.
There was a two big steam disinfection.
And would that have worked? Would that have been effective enough disinfectant by what we know by today's standards?
Yes, I think the steam would have worked, definitely. It would have killed the fleas as well.
Well, thank you so much, Faith Ho, for your tour and for showing me around here. We will catch up with you in a bit, but I want to divert now to a beautiful herb garden just around the corner. We've come into the beautiful herb garden that's by the museum now, and Rose Mack, who runs the garden, is here to show us round. And you're a retired developmental paediatrician, aren't you? And this garden was created just 16 years ago, but there's already so much here. It goes all the way around the side of the building, and it's absolutely beautiful and lush. It's like a kind of oasis amongst all the buildings. How many different species do you have here?
We have for medicinal ones about 200.
200?
Yeah, when it's in full bloom, it's about 250. Most of them are for Chinese medicine, and some of them are the source of Western medicine.
Oh, as well, so they're both?
As well, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're also joined by Chris Chan.
I'm a clinical scientist from Queen Mary Hospital. My focus is on diabetes and basically all diseases concerning the integration of Chinese medicine to their routine clinical services.
So what have we got here?
That plant over there, some indigo, that one was used to treat SARS in 2003.
How would this indigo be used to help with SARS?
It has antiviral effect, and is, according to Chinese medicine theory, is used for treating infectious diseases and heart diseases.
And so was that used alongside Western medicine? I mean, this
Yeah.
couldn't cure someone of SARS, could it?
Most of them used on top of Western medicine to try to increase the effect of the medications.
And what else do we have here? Show us some other
Okay.
interesting plants.
This one is a sweet wormwood. This is the source of artemisinin, which is frontline drug for treating of malaria.
Yes, and so that's a frontline drug in Western medicine.
In Western medicine, and this is still a Chinese medicine for thousands of years.
And so, Chris, is this something you would use in Chinese medicine? How would this be used?
Of course, we now have purified extract from this plant to treat malaria, and it's quite effective.
And is that quite an unusual example, or are there others that have crossed over from traditional Chinese medicine to Western medicine?
Yeah, it's actually not the only example. One of the drugs is called metformin, which we use in diabetes. It's actually an extract from a Chinese medicine plant. Aspirins as well, which is from the bark of a tree, used in ancient times.
So this is a plant in a little pot here, and
Yes.
it's got
It's
heart-shaped
just-
leaves with stripes on. It's very pretty.
This plant is actually Dioscorea gingibarensis, and it says that it's a yam.
Oh, I see, a yam. So
So
does
this
that
is a
have
yam.
hormonal properties?
Right. In West medicine, is for extraction of daojianyin, which is the source of steroids. Like they will produce testosterone, progesterone, estrogen, the birth control pills, and even cortisol. This one is rose periwinkle.
Oh, yes.
Right.
I've got some of this in my garden.
Yes, it's actually a weed.
Oh.
50 years ago, the Canadian researchers, they were working at it, looking for an anti-diabetic drug. But then they stumbled onto vincristine and vinblastin.
Now, you work on diabetes, Chris, don't you? What's your work involving?
My work is actually aimed to integrate Chinese medicine into the conventional management of patients in the hospital. So we are trying to use different formulations or single extract to treat patients according to Chinese medicine theory. And our preliminary results show that after adding Chinese medicine service as a whole, we can delay the kidney deterioration by half.
And now that Hong Kong is a special administrative region of China, are you seeing more Chinese medicine used here?
I would think so. Hong Kong want to promote Chinese medicine, so there is demand, even from visitors and friends. And if we look at the Chinese medicine books, they will describe things. It's getting closer to what is available in Western medicine.
Are you seeing this too, Chris? You must welcome this.
Yeah, there are different reasons that Chinese medicine is booming in Hong Kong. One of them is actually because Hong Kong is the perfect place to develop integration of Chinese Western medicine, because we have very good Western medicine system here, and we use Chinese medicine all the way through history.
And is it difficult to do randomised controlled trials when you personalise the treatment so much, so you want to give something different to each patient, and then it's hard to compare in the way that we would do with Western medicine?
It was difficult because traditionally randomized controlled trial is supposed to be very stringent, that we need a very controlled environment to compare the subjects between the groups. But in the past decade, we have a more clinical alike design of the trial, and in clinical situations there are always differentiation of patients and giving different treatments. So we compare adding Chinese medicine program as a whole, and we see the effect.
You're listening to Health Check from the BBC with me, Claudia Hammond, and today I'm in Hong Kong on the trail of the ways in which epidemics of disease here have shaped the region. And Professor Faith Ho has come back to join me and Chris Chan in the garden. Faith, we've been looking at the different herbs here. Do you think that Western medicine can integrate traditional Chinese medicine? Do you think there is a place for it?
Some people think there is already integration going on, particularly within the mainland of China. In Hong Kong, we are a little bit more cautious in what we call integration. No doubt there is a concurrent use of Western medicine and Chinese medicine within the same patient even, but is that integrated is the very big question.
Chris, can you see them being used together more and more?
Like what Professor Ho said, there is actually some degree of collaboration between them already, because the same patient may see Western medicine physicians and Chinese medicine physicians at the same time.
So the patients might be integrating it for themselves in one way by choosing who they go and see.
Yeah, but another integration might be using the concept of Chinese medicine to make the diagnosis of the disease more personalized. So with this concept, we might be able to stratify the patients more precisely and give them a more targeted treatment for different kind of disease, including infectious diseases.
Now, this lovely garden here surrounds the Hong Kong Museum of Medical Sciences. And Faith, I know you played a huge part in the establishment of this museum. What was this building originally?
This building originally started off as being called the Bacteriological Institute, the first centre for health protection in Hong Kong.
But now it's got tower blocks all around it.
It's the surroundings,
skyscrapers are everywhere.
It's the surroundings that have changed.
Yeah. So can we have a look at the laboratory inside?
Of course.
So is this the old lab? Oh, look at the lab bench here and the gas taps and the big sink. I have to say, this is very like our school lab benches we had.
These benches, as you say, are the original from the early 1900s.
And there are two mannequins.
That's right.
Of
so
lab
maybe
technicians.
we can go around and
Let's have a look. So they've got some dissected rats in front of them. I mean, they're models of them, obviously.
Now, people had to catch rats from different parts of Hong Kong and see whether they had plague infection, because it's a rat infection that starts first and then the flea from the rat jumps to the humans. They would open them up, and if they could see that the rat had plague. Can you see which rat has plague?
Well, so on the one on the left, you can see it's all its intestines all wiggly about like sausages, and then the one on the right, some of the intestines almost look as if they've disappeared and gone away, but there's all these little orangey yellow
That's
blobs.
correct.
So I'm guessing that one.
They are the enlarged lymph nodes that you get when you get plague, and that's why you get buboes, and that's why it's called bubonic plague. And once they see this, they know there's a rat infection, and they would take a piece of lymph node or spleen for confirmation. Now, this bin,
it says rat bin on the side.
what happened was fitted on a lamppost, and people who found rats or killed them would put them into the bin. There was a little bit of disinfectant inside, and the photos there show you one of the sanitary department staff who would regularly collect the rats from the bin.
So this man here's getting it out with tongs very carefully, taking the rat
definitely.
out of the bin. I guess he doesn't want to
Now-
touch it.
He has to label all rats from one bin with the number of the bin, and immediately workers will have to go to that district and clean out all the possible rat runs and try to prevent that rat infection from spreading into an epidemic.
Now, the museum here covers all sorts of aspects of medical history, from smallpox to what makes a medical city. But I'd really like to head downstairs to where you have an exhibition on a much more recent epidemic than the plague, which is SARS from 2003.
SARS was the first newly emerging disease causing a pandemic in the 21st century. From Hong Kong, it spread to the whole of the world. But here we are more concerned with how SARS impacted our city. 10 years after SARS, we did this particular project on the Oral History Archive, which collected together interviews of 50 different people, both from the healthcare working field as well as the ordinary people and all the other unknown heroes that really contributed to the control of SARS in Hong Kong.
So you've got a screen here with the pictures of the people on, and
That's right, got 20 different people. We had high officials like the Secretary for Health, how he made those policies. But we also had a school teacher to tell us how they managed when they closed all the schools.
so can we hear from one of the patients?
Unfortunately, that is in Cantonese, but would you like to?
Yes.
Okay, let's try.
I see, and you press the button. So it says he was a secondary school student.
Yes.
So what sort of things does he talk about?
Yes. He's talking about his experience as a young boy in hospital and how he was comforted by the caring attitude of the nurses. But he also went to tell us a little bit about his experience of the discrimination that he had experienced after leaving hospital. Because people were still worried whether he was still carrying the germ or not. And every time he walked into a lift, everybody went out of the lift as well.
Is there another story that's of maybe a nurse
Yes,
or a member of
maybe
staff?
if I can talk about this doctor who was the consultant in the ICU, and midway through the epidemic of SARS, the authorities decided to admit all patients into one hospital in Hong Kong. There were 8 healthcare workers in ICU that came down. It was just too much work for everybody. And he described how one night he felt he was starting to get the symptoms.
Let's have a listen to the doctor.
So the next morning he decided that he'll go to work, but he said to his wife as he was leaving, just be prepared, I may not come home tonight.
And did he go home?
He went into hospital. He knew that he was developing the SARS. But fortunately, he went through a huge procedure of, the treatment, but he recovered.
What a brave man.
Yes. And now he comes on the trail to teach the students. As you see from this model here, we have a model of a housing estate where they had over 300 cases of SARS and they had 50 people die. Eventually, they evacuated everybody from this block and sent them all for isolation, and then WHO and local healthcare took samples from every bit of this building, and then they disinfected everything before people were allowed to come back. Eventually, it was discovered that maybe it had something to do with one patient. He had been admitted to that hospital, and it was from that hospital that he caught this disease. He stayed one night with his brother in his flat here, and he had diarrhea, and it infected all the drains vertically.
Just from someone staying there for one night?
One night. So you can understand that, like the time of plague, it was a time of extreme fear and worry for everybody.
So I can imagine that visiting this exhibit for some people must bring back memories of all those fears in a way.
But on the other hand, memories are important. They teach us that if you want to overcome an epidemic, it's not just the top shots. There are lots of other people. Like the person who came to clean this place, she was one of our interviewees, and she told us about how she felt. One day while they were coming to work as usual, they got an order from above that everybody was not allowed to go home. There's something you need to do. They were the only cleaners willing to do it. All the other contract cleaners refused to do the cleaning in this building. So the group of them every day went through flat by flat trying to disinfect everything. Every day she hoped that she could go back to see her family.
Chris Chan, were you here during that time in Hong Kong? What do you remember?
It's actually a very special period for me as I was having my public exam. And we only knew that we can't get out of our apartments because it would be very easily to get infected.
So you couldn't get to take your exams?
Well, we can't actually go to libraries, and even when we have the oral exams, we have to all wear surgical masks. And because we need to choose the university subject, and 1/3 of my class became doctors because of SARS.
That's amazing.
Because they wanted to treat patients.
And I'm guessing after all that you did well in your exams, looking at your job now.
Yes, it's good.
Thought you might have done. So we're heading down into the basement. Now I can see the Chinese medicine shop through here. So this is like an old panelled shop. So Chris, is this like a very traditional Chinese medicine shop?
Yeah, because traditionally we use herbs, and it's here many of drawers. In Cantonese, it's 八字柜. So it's like 100 drawers, and you can see the herbs inside.
And there's a counter, and there's some of the herbs in dishes here. And so would these all be used for completely different things, or I guess you're using combinations of things? So is it possible to say, oh, that's for that, or not in Chinese medicine?
Each herb actually has its own use. So usually in Chinese medicine we do combinations. So somebody will prescribe 3 to 5, but some of them will prescribe 10 to 20. It depends on the style of the Chinese medicine practitioner, and it depends on the severity of the diseases as well.
And you always boil them up into that very strong, some would say not very nice smelling tea.
Some are bitter, some are sweet. Actually, the taste is related to the function of the herb as well. So for the very bitter herbs, we call it clearing heat. For the sweet herbs, it's actually tonifying your body and replenishing some of your qi or vital energy in your body.
So when you say it takes the heat out, what does that mean?
Well, when Chinese medicine describes heat or cold, it's actually representing a state of the body. For example, in SARS, we are talking about patients with high fever, like very severe pneumonia, yellow sputum, all like this. And they may also present with red tongue and easily to get sore throat. So when we are saying clearing heat, we are actually preventing them having high fever or having a severe pneumonia or having yellow sputum.
So you're kind of cooling them down again.
Yep.
So Professor Ho, the trail and the museum are of course looking back at the past, but what can we learn from the past that will help us in looking forward to the future when it comes to disease?
Oh, I think it's a lot of lessons that we can learn. For instance, how it all started because of the living conditions of people that were conducive to the outbreak of an epidemic. So we learn how we need to prepare well. We also learn how to deal with an epidemic because there must be very good communication and cooperation between the people who are trying to control the epidemic and the people who are impacted. I think also how to help people to be more prepared. Maybe people need to be educated first about epidemics, how to recognize them, how to help yourself, keep hygiene, and all those customs.
So thank you so much for your tour today, Professor Ho, and thank you to you, Chris Chan. That is all from Health Check for now, but do listen out for The Evidence on BBC World Service on Saturday. We've seen how an epidemic shapes a city, but I'll be joined by an audience to ask how the evidence shapes preparations for the next epidemic. We'll be asking what happened to SARS and what might be next around the corner. And thank you to the producer, Geraldine Fitzgerald. I'm Claudia Hammond. Bye for now.